There is a principle from Lean that comes in and says the best way to reduce waste in the system is don't put it in the system. That's how this stuff manifests.
Welcome to Lean Stories. I'm Jonathan Bertfield, CEO at Lean Startup Co. This is where we dive deep with practitioners from around the world who've discovered the transformative power of the Lean Startup methodology. In each episode, you'll hear authentic stories from product leaders and innovators across industries and geographies, how they've discovered Lean principles, the pivotal moments that change their approach, and the real-world impact of putting customers at the center of everything they build. Whether you're running product in an early-stage startup, leading innovation at a Fortune 500 company, or just getting started building your Lean Startup skills, these stories will inspire you to test and learn, iterate and pivot your way to success. Don't forget, subscribe to Lean Stories for more inspiring conversations and share them with your team. Let's get started with today's Lean story with Scott Sehlhorst, who has over 20 years of experience developing products and advising companies on product management and strategy. His expertise spans from defining product portfolios, aligning business requirements with overall strategy, to implementing agile transformations and change management practices. In our conversation today, Scott's going to highlight some of the challenges of shifting mindsets within the team and the importance of measuring success through documented hypotheses around both the solution and the business outcomes. So welcome, Scott. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm thrilled to be here.
So why don't we kick it off? Tell us a little bit about your background, and if you can focus in on what were some of the moments in your career that got you to a place where you recognize the value of using Lean Startup in practice and the mindset and any of those components of Lean Startup that you think about.
Yeah, I'd love to. It probably, like a lot of other people, the moment that pushed me into the Lean Startup thinking happened before I'd been exposed to Lean Startup. And so I'm a product management and strategy consultant. I spent the last decade or so helping organizations get better at building products, changing the culture, changing the systems, the processes, and helping the people inside those companies. Before that, I spent about a decade player coach, product management consultant type person. Before that, I was a narrow AI software developer. Before that, I was a mechanical engineer. And I had this switching point, I guess, when I was doing software development work. I was leading a team, working for a client, and the client told us exactly what they wanted us to build. And we built it, right? Over several months with the full team, spent north of $1 million building this exact solution for our customer. Never launched, went straight to the shelf because it wasn't what their customers needed. It wasn't what they want. It was what this one person wanted, but it wasn't what was actually needed. And so taking away from that was, for me, was appreciating that executing the plan is too narrow of a definition of what it means to be good. You actually need to course correct and improve the plan while you're going and use those outside signals, be open to learning. And then when I did come across the Lean Startup book and read it and looked at Eric and David's thinking, I was ready for it, right? I'd already sort of lived in that world.
What happened to the project that you built that was someone else's vision, but didn't iterate along the way?
It never launched. We built the project. We built the solution. We built the test cases. It was working as designed. And I think this is where I started getting up on my high horse that I don't care if it's working as designed. I care if it's working as needed. And there was no discussion about what was needed, right? I didn't know to ask those questions, and we suffered the consequences of not asking those questions.
So you had a revelation moment there, right? You were inspired. Did the leader who had been pushing for that particular solution, did they recognize the waste that they'd triggered?
I think they did. We were a consulting organization building this, right? So we were an outside vendor building this for a stakeholder at our client, who I don't think is there anymore. But I know that they became not our client shortly thereafter. And I wasn't in those conversations, right? This was almost 30 years ago.
So keep the thread going, right? So you had a moment, you recognized like there's got to be a better way, right? And you start to think about some of the patterns that might help you get to that better way. Now make the connection, and then you found the book that you read, Lead Startup, or some other books. Like, talk about that moment.
Yeah, I can still remember driving in the car, listening to Lean Startup, and then and having this connection moment of this guy is talking about the mistakes I lived through, right, and made myself. And then digging into Four Steps to the Epiphany, right, like between those two books, it was I need to completely rethink how I approach this stuff, and started me down a journey of helping my clients rethink how they approach this stuff,
Right.
first as individuals and then as organizations. There's been a lot of conversational shift. I mean, maybe it's in the zeitgeist over the last 5 years or so, talking about feature factories. Melissa Perry's great book, Escape the Build Factory,
Build trap. Yeah.
the Build Trap. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, thank you. Sorry, Melissa. Like leaning into that mindset. It's what really resonates for me is when you're in a feature factory, when you've got order givers and order takers, there's there's very limited room for the experimentation that Lean Startup encourages us to do, which is discovering what we're wrong about. Right? You can focus on what is your go-to-market, what is your pricing, what is your packaging, what is your messaging, but all of that stuff is sort of after you've built the thing you were told to build. Really need to pull that in. So I think about it in terms of, I mean, in some ways, it's what was Agile supposed to be in the first place, and there's really three questions I would say that you have to answer in order to be Agile, or more specifically, in order to embody Lean Startup principles in how you build products, not just how you go to market. And the first one is to create opportunities to learn. The second one is to do the things that cause you to learn something. And then the third thing is to update your plan when you learn something. And in larger organizations, there are barriers to all three of those.
How does that show itself for you? How do you guide your teams or the companies that you work with to create those opportunities?
The maybe unexpected piece is that it isn't about putting a run and experiment step in your process flow. Those opportunities, in my experience, aren't prevented by the rigid following of a specific doctrine of how you build. You know, what does your Kanban look like? What is your waterfall process? Whatever it is, it's the opportunity comes from changing how you orient towards the work. When you when you start with the notion of I know exactly what I want to build, right, which is that feature factory mindset, somebody else knows exactly what they want you to build. And you want to shift from we know what we want to build to we believe we know what we want to build. And introducing that notion of belief, there's another great book by Julia Galef called The Scout Mindset, which, right, the really short version, and I'm going to oversimplify it, is that soldiers defend their position. I know that this is right, and I'm going to defend it. Go build what I told you to build. And the scout doesn't operate that way. The scout is looking for truth. What's the best path? Where are there obstacles? And they're trying to discover truth. And so when you shift and embrace that mindset to come in and say, this is what we believe we need to build. That opens the door when you embody that in how you talk about your work. It creates the opportunity for learning to say, well, how do we update our beliefs? Which is, I know I'm like name dropping like crazy on this call, but if we look at Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets, it's
Yeah.
about how do we operate in the context of our beliefs. And this is layering towards like how I embody lean startup stuff in a larger organization. We can go down it's like going through the looking glass between Galef and Duke's work into the world of uncertainty. And we can go down that path, but we can also just sort of stay to your point on that first topic of opportunities to learn. When we give ourselves space to be wrong, it opens the door to learning. It gives us an opportunity to say, I'm going to improve my beliefs or refine my beliefs. And that's the opportunity I want to put in place.
How have you been able to kind of translate the messages and the mindsets that come from those kinds of texts? How do you translate that into getting the confidence of the teams, getting the confidence of the leaders to shift that mindset?
Yeah. So there's a couple things, and I have a slightly different take on this than maybe some of the greats working this way. And I've evolved it over the last decade of working with teams of trying to figure out how to put these practices in place and seeing what works and what fails inside the organizations. Like if I look at lean UX, right, Godolph and Seiden's book, and they kind of present this notion of if we build X, we will get outcome Y. Right? There's this hypothesis that spans the totality of what I'm doing to why I'm doing it. And what I found is that's not approachable. Like teams crash their ships on the rocks of that giant hypothesis. And so I struggled with it and tried different approaches over the years, right? Going back about a decade. And finally, I did a hypothesis tree development. There are so many things that are embedded hypotheses. If we build X, we get to Y. Did I pick the right customer? Did I pick the right problem for that customer? Did I pick the right approach to solving it? Did I do a good job with that approach? All of this stuff is kind of baked in there. And if we go into that, well, I kind of tried that too. And it's overwhelming to say, I've got 16 hypotheses here and we need to test them all. No, no, no. We're trying to build stuff, right? We're trying to get stuff out the door. It's a bit of a culture clash. What I have found though, is you can tighten it into two specific hypotheses, each of which has a different learning loop, each of which has a different audience and a different kind of conversation. And the first is the solution hypothesis. If we build this, it will address a need, and there is an observable change that will tell us that we did it the right way. We picked the right need, we picked the right customer, we did a good job executing with the right solution approach. And that's sort of self-contained, and it's the kind of reasoning that engineers are already doing, that designers are already doing. Instead of having the work you're working on, the thing you're building being primary and this rationale secondary, we're inverting it and saying our belief is primary and the way that we're trying to deliver is secondary, right? This is a shift from did we finish to did it work? We can contain that and use that as a tight feedback loop for discovery, for experimentation, for course correction at the team level. To get to the other half of your question, how do I shift the leaders in an organization? It's the other hypothesis. It's this outcome hypothesis. If I can create that change, right? Higher conversion rates, larger average order size, reduction in customer abandonment or like churn metrics. If I can create that change by building something that addresses some need, right? Like the team is totally on that. If I can create that change, here's how the company benefits. There's effectively a business hypothesis. If we can increase customer lifetime value, we think we'll drive revenue up. If we can reduce churn, we think we will increase our compound annual growth rate. We have those conversations that kind of live in the business domain. Engineers struggle to have that kind of a conversation. Product managers perfectly suited, well, really for both, but perfectly suited to have that conversation with stakeholders, leaning into the definitions of the problems we're trying to solve and what it's worth, right? Making those investment decisions. That's where the outcome hypothesis thrives.
So solution hypothesis and outcome hypothesis kind of potentially operating in parallel with each other. Solution hypothesis sounds like that's oriented towards the team who's doing. Like they're the customer, right? They're obviously doing the work, but they're getting convinced. They're getting their body of evidence which says there is a solution path here. We understand it. That's true?
That's exactly it. But I would say they're more tightly coupled than working. I mean, yes, parallel is fair. I think that's accurate. But one of them is operating as a faster feedback loop inside the other one, and they connect at the observable change. That observable change is the output of the solution hypothesis, but it's the input to the outcome hypothesis. That's where they couple.
When the leaders see the evidence emerging then they get convinced, right? That it's clear to them, right? This was worthwhile. Are you foreshadowing that kind of ahead of time in order to say, all right, this is how we should operate, and trust me, we'll get to a really interesting outcome for the business?
Well, a little bit, but I don't have to do that much. And here's sort of why. Like, right, once you're operating that way, you're shifting that conversation. If the team is focusing on did it work, but the leadership team is focusing on did it matter, right? Which is that longer feedback loop and the quarterly business review, right? You've got those longer feedback loops affecting things. But this is where it consistently gets exciting for my clients is doing some of this work up front. It improves critical thinking and it changes how you approach what you're about to do.
Mhm.
We've already got some leaders saying, go fix that problem, right? We've got a huge churn problem. We're losing 10% of our customers every year, and that's a heck of a headwind to try and grow into. Go fix that somehow. Go figure it out. And instead of that just being a decoupled directive, now we've got something that's a little bit clearer. Go fix our churn problem by increasing retention in a specific domain or with a specific customer group or for our most profitable customers. And we're just putting that sort of layer of critical thinking on it. A piece of that is developing a problem statement. And sort of in true lean startup fashion, I'm working on a book. I'm about 50,000 words into a book on harnessing problem statements, how we change organizations to take advantage of what we're trying to accomplish to set direction. So if anybody wants to learn more about how we get started down this path, harnessingproblemstatements.com. Drop your email and I'll get you updates on the book as it's progressing. Would love to have feedback that helps me course correct, from what I plan to write to what I need to write. So getting back into that shape with the leaders, when you articulate a problem statement that says, this is the problem, this is who has it, this is how big the problem is and how big a bite we want to take out of that problem, and then write your outcome hypothesis. We think we can take that big of a bite by doing this thing. Trying to write that forces critical thinking into the conversation that helps you course correct your ambitions into something that's feasible, practical, realistic.
Yeah.
And when you do that across the different problems that are on a leadership team's radar, they instantly have different conversations about how they prioritize. What do I do first? What do I not do at all? I've killed big initiatives by putting critical thinking into the way we structure what we're going to go do before we spend the money to do it, which is a huge win for a company. I know this is lean startup, but there is a principle from lean that comes in and says the best way to reduce waste in the system is don't put it in the system. That's how this stuff manifests. The longer cycle of did we build better products? Did we have better outcomes? I'm usually operating as a consultant. I mean, I end up being with clients for multiple years, but whether or not I get to stick around happens before we find out if these changes have an impact, if we're measuring the lagging indicators. But they can see the changes in behavior. And this goes down like Gary Klein's whole path of how do you improve decision making. You don't do it with results, and Andy Du talks about that too. You do it by improving the way you make your decisions. And that's pretty evident for the leadership teams. So bringing these practices in changes how you set direction, not just how you execute a course correct.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I see it so often that leadership have declared either in a strategy or just in a vision they have for a product, kind of a fairly loose target, and the teams are left kind of guessing. What does that mean? What does a win look like here? Have we really interpreted the leaders' expectations appropriately? So what I really appreciate about what you're pushing there is getting leadership to embrace and participate in that critical thinking. It both forces them to understand, well, what does good look like, and do we actually want that? But it also builds a ton of transparency into the process because now teams who are going to do the work can see what leaders were expecting.
there's different ways to think about the benefits. One of them is like culturally, it's just straight up better. We're aligning teams towards purpose. We're tapping into their expertise, and right, it's like I'm not showing up and checking off items on a list and slogging through the infinite backlog. I'm actually trying to solve a problem. I'm creating value for my customers. I'm moving the needle for my business. That alignment to purpose changes things for those engineers. Now,
Mm.
as again, as a consultant, I usually can't sell that. I have to acknowledge that that's a side benefit. I have had clients who that's what they care about, but that's usually not what what my clients care about. Like it's the how do we get better at transparently setting direction and shifting into how do I talk about what I'm trying to accomplish and make the best use of my teams and tap into them. There's a question along those lines that I will ask sometimes to just try and make the point with somebody who maybe isn't familiar with the lean startup mindset and thinking and the notion of improving the plan in parallel with executing the plan. And they'll say, well, why is this worth doing? I said, how much should you be willing to spend on an initiative or a program or an epic, right? To go build something. What I find consistently is that that isn't part of the conversation. The conversation is how much do I think it'll cost? That's not what you should inform your decision to do it based on. You have to reconcile, wow, that seems really expensive with that's expensive but worth it, or that's expensive but not. And then tap into your ability to say, okay, well, let's take another at bat. Let's come up with another way to try and move the needle on this problem, to try and make a difference. Can we do 50% of the work and get 80% of the value? Right? That Pareto principle stuff shows up fairly frequently.
How much will it cost? You need to have some definitions around like, well, which platform we're using, what technologies, like what's the scale of this, right? So is that the key distinction for you that like we can think of that strategically, how much we're willing to spend without understanding exactly what the spending will be deployed against?
It is exactly it. And for me, it is a forcing function towards the kind of conversation we need to have. I can't say responsibly how much I'm willing to spend unless I have a point of view about how much I think it's worth. If I don't talk about the outcomes, then I can't, if I can't put a number on that says this is worth 10 million pounds. I can't do that without saying, here's my understanding of the mechanisms of value creation. This is how it results in that growth. I had a client, a brilliant CMO 15 years ago, and she said, we hit our CAGR target one deal at a time. There's a whole bunch of customers making a whole bunch of decisions, and it adds up to a forecast, sure. And we talk about the forecast, but really it's what is the focus on why this is going to work? So what is that mechanism of value creation? And that's how you unfold your outcome hypothesis. We think making these changes, customer adoption, competitive positioning, higher average order size, whatever, is going to lead to more money. Okay, great. We've described our belief. That's what we want to anchor on. And then we can find out how we think we might get there, have a healthy conversation with a team who says, we don't have the capacity to get there. We can't increase average order size by 20%. We can't increase conversion by 300 basis points. We don't know how to do it. What we think we can do is this. And then I can use that outcome hypothesis to say, here's what that's worth. And then decide, is that a good decision to go invest there? Or, you know what? Let's focus on something else and keep trying to invent some other way with our capabilities and with our capacity to move that needle. Don't just run at it because I told you to. Go after what we believe we can accomplish, right? It's getting into those decision frames. There's that tight loop. Did it work? No? Okay. Try something else. And did it matter? No, let's not pursue it. And we get the did it matter benefits just by exposing these questions before we decide what to work on.
Talk to us a little bit about when you've tried to build this mindset, when you've tried to have teams and leaders embrace these approaches and these ways of working, and it hasn't worked. Like, have you been able to identify like what's the pattern that has prevented an organization from adopting the ways of working you're describing?
I'll give you a specific example, and then I'll talk about sort of the pattern that I think it's part of. I had a team in the defense industry space that was very much locked into this sort of command and control mindset. Kind of makes sense, right, in a military orientation, but very much a order giver, order taker pattern. And if we go all the way down into that simple little user story, there's two ways you can use the user story. There's the one that is very common, and there's the one that's actually right. So the very common one is I'm trying to manage my work. I know what I'm building. I've done some solution decomposition. I broke it up into a bunch of pieces, and each of these pieces is a thing I'm delivering. That's where these folks were. And every user story said, update the API, change what's available in this piece of the interface or whatever. And here's my specification. Their acceptance criteria is it needs to work like this. It needs to look like this. This is how it needs to operate with this level of performance, right? And that's what they contained. That's the wrong orientation, in my opinion. That's the wall I failed to break through. What the user story should say is this is the user and this is their goal and the context around why they have that goal, right? Like, so there's some outside in understanding. And then the acceptance criteria in the user story should be, what does a user consider to be acceptable in pursuit of their goal? Which is a different conversation than what is the specification for the thing I plan to build. And that shift moves from what I call the zone of control. This is the spec. Did I hit it? Red, green, refactor, yes or no, keep going till I hit it. To the sphere of influence. Did I build something that made a difference? And they were unwilling and maybe unable, but certainly unwilling to make that shift. And this is a deep down at the team level core piece of that shift from the zone of control to the sphere of influence and becoming uncomfortable and embracing uncertainty. And they just couldn't get past it.
Yeah.
So did not work.
Yeah. And so what's the pattern there that you think that is reflective of? Because I see a lot of organizations and the individuals who are building products inside of them. My guess for why that organization operated that way, what I see as a pattern is an unwillingness to kind of deal with the harsh truth, right? Part of the harsh truth is they don't know. They don't know enough about the customer to know what they would see as that this is valuable for me. And so like they're confronting, well, there's actually quite a lot of work here. I can't just state it. I have to find that out. And it's kind of much easier, and maybe this is harsh, but like lazier to say, well, we'll build it and then we'll see what they do with it and see what good looks like. Right. So is that what you see with that pattern?
It is. But I think what I would do is I would rub the flip side of that lazy coin and say they're not empowered to do it. They're not engaged. They're not given permission. They're judged, compensated, oriented towards delivering on the plan, not improving the plan.
Yeah.
So it's
So
culture, mindset, systems, all of those things
you,
prevent them from doing this. So yeah, I've definitely met people I who don't want that responsibility, don't want that discomfort. They want to go build elegant solutions to the exact things you told them to build. Yeah, that's fine, but if that's all you have, that's going to be a problem at the systems level.
you mentioned that some of your engagements stretch out. You said you used the word years, right? So like that feels like a long time to be working inside of a single organization as a consultant. Do you see like a journey that happens there where there's the maturity switch kind of flicks at some point when they go from aspiring to use these ways of working to like the fluency just shows itself, right? And starts happening. Like, do you see that moment?
I see the shift from not doing it to doing it, but it really transitions into the how do we get better at it, right? That's when the conversation pivots from how do we start doing it to how do we get better at it. And the reason these engagements take a long time, like all of my engagements start with a 3-month contract. Whether it's a trial contract of like, let's make sure that the way Scott approaches these things is going to work in our organization, but they last 18 months, 36 months, 56 months, 4 years, right? I mean, it's the okay, what's next conversation keeps happening for me.
Right.
And this transformation, there is no transform on a dime. It's 3 to 5 years, and it depends on how far you're trying to go, how much executive support you have, how much cultural willingness to do things in a different way exists. And then it's just sort of I tend to get pointed towards where the biggest challenges within the organization of, you know, I was working with a major computer manufacturer that was split up into different divisions, and the division focused on developing software and consumer software was all in. So I got to spend quite a bit of time with them, really getting better at what they were producing for customers. But another division that was in the hardware side of things had zero interest. And it just, right, it created this conflict. We never unlocked all the potential that we could. And eventually the organization, I think, lost the appetite to try. So that, I mean, that happens too. It kind of peters out. But the upside for me is the people I worked with, they're doing great stuff. Some of them still there, some of them somewhere else.
Are there specific metrics that you look at along that journey? Some of those leading indicators of this is a sign of progress. I was I've been working with a telco in Europe for the last few years, and we were talking about metrics, and one of them that came up was the number of teams that had embraced the essentially the innovation strategy that the organization was trying to do, which was about replication. We don't want to do one-offs, right? And so that was a key metric for them. How many teams are actually injecting as a discipline into their work our strategic vision? And it threw me a little bit because I hadn't been expecting that metric, but it's a really powerful one. It's like embracing the ways of working as a proportion of the overall team. Is that something that you point to as a key indicator?
There are a couple. I haven't looked at it at the team count. And the reason why is any particular team has some mixture of work. There is business as usual, keep the lights on type stuff, right, for every team. There is focusing on engineering and refactoring and right, that's sort of improving our hygiene type work.
Yeah.
Then there is I tend to talk about it as the discretionary work, right? It's pursuit of new initiatives. It's the things that we can choose to do with the capacity we have available. So I don't count the teams, but what I have looked at a couple of times is looking at features and saying what proportion of the features in our PI, in our release, in our backlog, have solution hypotheses documented with and I hold the bar to with a quantified outcome and ideally with an estimation range, right? So there's some rigor and discipline. You can't just say, I think if we build this new sign up wizard, we will get a higher conversion rate. I'm like, well, okay, you've given me a direction, but you haven't done the work yet. It's, I believe if I build this wizard, we're going to get a 20% lift in conversion. Okay, great. Or a between 5% and 40%, whatever it is, whatever level of maturity we're at. So how many of the features have those? How many of the epics or initiatives or programs, everybody uses a little bit different structure, have a quantified economic outcome, have an estimation range for likely economic outcomes, have a documented outcome hypothesis, have a clear problem statement. So I can look at the proportion of the work that's in the system and see how much of it sort of conforms to these practices which embody these ideas. That's the way I would measure. Because every team is faced with the reality of we're pushing on other stuff that isn't just this.
All right, let's wrap up with a final question. What's been one of your favorite experiments that you've run over the last few years?
A favorite experiment when I was working with a team that at a company that got acquired by Amazon. So it's always hard to not say team names, but they were looking at the A/B testing of different ways to engage customers to buy more items at once. So instead of having single product transactions, how do we get them from single products to multiple products? And we're oriented around measuring item count in checkout, right? Like, so we had this observable change that we could crisply measure. And then they ran a series of experiments, from promotions to banners to different implementations of cross-selling technology. Like, when you buy this, you also want to buy that. And they ran all of that evaluation against the sample population, but in the concert of, this is how we're measuring if it worked. Instead of just saying, hey, we deployed this idea we had. It was perfectly exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, getting that tight outcome from kind of the experiment design, like that they flow through, that doesn't always happen, right? That's a good, a rare moment.
Yeah, and we also we left some on the table. Like, we could have gone further, right? So this was our solution hypothesis exploration. But there's also a business hypothesis that says, if I buy more things at a time, right, per transaction, do I become a more valuable customer, or do I have fewer transactions?
Yeah.
That was something we didn't get the opportunity to test, or at
Right.
least not while I was there.
Right. Nice. Awesome. Scott, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. Really enjoyed this conversation. I'll drop in that link that you mentioned into the show notes. And so hopefully
Fantastic.
you'll get some people following up to give you some feedback. Real pleasure chatting with you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I hope you got as much out of that great conversation as I did. So much to learn there. If it resonated with you and you'd like to explore how Lean Startup approach could help your team or your organization solve similar challenges, I'd love to connect. There's no cost, just a 15-20 minute chat, and we can exchange ideas and see what's possible. You can grab a time with me using the link below. And genuinely, I would really look forward to that conversation.